It's good to be here, and it's good in advance of coming here to learn a little bit about the work of the Centre for Governance Leadership and Global Responsibility. I should say before I start that I'm rather envious of this building. We try as hard as we can to kind of creep down the hill, but you know, now you've got all these big signs and big barriers up. It's difficult to come any further. But I do think that this building says something about the welcoming nature of Leeds Beckett University, and people here have certainly been very welcoming to me. I think it says something about the professionalism of the Vice Chancellor and her staff, but most of all I think it says something about the way in which this university faces out and embraces the city of Leeds. I also think that I'm here slightly under false pretenses because until last week I thought I was coming along to the centre to talk to a few of your students, and I'm pleased to think that there are one or two of them here, but I wasn't quite expecting this this audience. So this is a topic of great interest for some people. For others, it's rather dull. It's the territory of company secretaries and maybe even university secretaries and administrators. But of course, it's at the centre of all that we do. And I think the idea of organisation, I've got a friend who actually refers to organisation as the greatest invention ever in the world, but the idea of organisation, people working together towards a common goal, is very powerful. But there are usually two problems. One is the people, because they're complicated. They often have different personalities, different loyalties, different motivations. Some of them are not always good motivations. And the goals of organisations are not always terribly clearly defined, or clearly enough defined in a way that would get kind of people aligned behind them. And if the people go wrong, or the mission goes wrong, and the governance is not there to deal with that issue, you usually run into problems. And just think about some of the headlines from this week. So we've had, just in the last couple of days, an urgent inquiry into tax evasion by wealthy clients of HSBC. I hope that some of you are here and will give generously to the university. There's another headline earlier in the week that said 10 days to save Greece, which seemed pretty dramatic. Tesco threatens new squeeze on suppliers, and they've been in the wars, and at the heart of their problem in Tesco is a whole range of governance issues. Chiefs in the plural lose bonuses after, quotes, $8.9 billion fine for BNP Paribas. PwC, apologies to anyone from PwC here, condemned of giving misleading evidence. Child safety not guaranteed in care homes in Rochdale. And then my final headline, of course, that you can't miss in Yorkshire at the moment, government in Rotherham Council takeover after abuse inquiry. So all of these things, that short list, which literally comes from 2 days of press coverage, are all really at heart problems of governance. And despite, and I'm going to talk about some of them, but despite years of codes, reports, guidelines, we still experience these catastrophic failures, and catastrophic failures that damage people's lives in a serious way, and maybe even in some cases lead to people dying. So I'm thinking about the kind of mid-staff's review in the NHS. And what these things are all about usually is a strange combination of systems failure and human error, or sometimes deliberate human action, but human error, usually accidental, sometimes contrived. Now, having said all that, I hope that there are very few of us, apart from members of this centre, of course, who wake up in the morning thinking about governance. I don't wake up thinking about governance. I think about education and research and knowledge exchange and all the usual problems of the day. But it's there. It's there as an important means to an end. I'll just say a word about my kind of own experience in this area. So there we have on one slide 41 years of my life working for these different organisations and with these different organisations. So in the NHS, I was the chief executive from 1993 till 2000, and those of you who know recent history will know that that was the time of Harold Shipman, of the inquiry into the tragedy of Bristol babies, of the problems of governance and malpractice at Alderhay Hospital. And during that period I was the accounting officer for the NHS, and I had to deal with all of these things in sequence, and of course along the way I learned a lot about governance. I've worked a bit with charities, and in Biobank, which you see there, which is the world's biggest genetic epidemiology study, something I'm interested in. We recruited to this study in the UK 500,000 people, 500,000 people. We convinced them that they should give us 9 million biological samples from every orifice, and we asked them to give us consent to access their medical records for the next 30 years. And 500,000 people did this without really much question or complaint. In the first year of our study, we had 3 complaints from people who felt they hadn't been properly informed or adequately informed about what we were going to do with their information. So questions of consent, questions of the use of data and access, a big issue for me and for a lot of other people working in this area, and going to become a big issue in all our lives as the amount of information that we collect about each other doubles every 12 months at the moment. HEFCE will be more familiar with some people here down at the bottom. In HEFCE we had a clear regulatory duty to ensure that public money is used for the purposes intended. You know, if we give you money for teaching, you spend it on teaching. If we give you money for research and biological sciences, you spend it in that area. So HEFCE is the principal regulator also for those universities in the UK that are exempt charities, and we advise the Charity Commission where appropriate, or we would advise the Charity Commission where appropriate. You will be familiar with, and we'll talk later about London School of Economics, but you'll be familiar with the issues that arose around the LSE and their links to Libya, and also some of the problems that were faced at London Met. But I can assure you that there are very many other issues that HEFCE dealt with on a regulatory basis that are kind of under the radar. Having worked before going there at another university, I kind of found these kind of eye-watering tales of how badly governed and managed some of our universities in England were. So in addition to all of that, as you can see there, I've worked in 2 universities, the Vice Chancellor, one in Scotland in Dundee, where all the notation's different but the principles are the same, and of course here in Leeds. Both universities had their own royal charters, in our case 111 years old, and had autonomous existence, so that you know, we don't need all this regulatory claptrap from HEFCE and all these other people, because we know, because it was set out in a charter in 1904, what we're supposed to be doing and how we're supposed to be doing it. Okay, so let me go into a little bit more detail. I mentioned that there have been countless reports on governance in the last 25 years. and I've picked out my 9 favourites, and I'm not going to talk about them all, but just a quick run through. Some of you will remember, at least a few of you will remember, Adrian Cadbury's report which essentially was responding to financial irregularities in companies in the city. Lord Nolan's report was really government inspired by John Major in the mid-90s to clear up the consequence of the so-called cash for questions row that was hogging the government at that time in the lead up to the election in the early 90s and beyond. Nolan then went on, of course, to define what are still referred to as the principles of public life. And I chose these 2, one because I know Cadbury and he helped me a lot in something I did later, but I also did battle with Nolan about governance issues in the NHS, and found that actually an edifying experience, because he taught me a lot whilst we were fighting and negotiating over things. My own contributions, some of them are here, are more modest, but on the top right hand corner, the corporate governance standard for public services is something I did for the Rowntree Foundation and SIPFA in 2005. There being no equivalent of the Cadbury report 13 years earlier, but no equivalent for public sector organisations. So we had, at that time, £500 billion being used through public spending in this country, overseen by organisations that had no code of governance, and we tried to put that right with our standard. Was not hugely well received here, largely because we got it out 3 months before the Treasury, who were trying to do the same thing, and theirs was hopeless and ours was very good. And the government kind of didn't take that kindly, strangely. But it's used in many other countries and translated in many other countries. I also had the job with the kind of blue page in the middle there. They're all blue. The one on the left-hand side. I also had the job at one point in my life in 2008 to defuse, as it was referred to defuse the parliamentary expenses scandal in Scotland. I mean, unfortunately, it didn't ask me to do it in Westminster, but we did head it off in Scotland because we produced, me and some others produced this report described by the Daily Telegraph as a report of breathtaking clarity, which is the only decent thing the Daily Telegraph have ever said about me. And we literally served a warning to the Scottish Parliament that said, if you don't stop this now and deal with it now, you're going to be in the mire for years, just as they are at Westminster, in trying to deal with the public backlash. So that was fun. The one in the middle there of the middle row is back to my kind of issues of public data, tackling questions about the use of public data on behalf of the ESRC. And then I had the job on the far right here of what I thought at the time was kind of squaring the regulatory circle for the government's reforms of higher education. The government reformed higher education in a very short space of time between 2010 and 2012. They didn't have the bottle to get the legislation required to oversee these changes effectively, and we had to come with some sort of cobbled together version of how to oversee the work of higher education during this change period. Good old HEFCE stuck to its guns with its Memorandum of Assurance and Accountability, providing clarity, if you like, by defining the formal relationships between HEFCE, the governing bodies of universities, and indeed, for Susan and I, the heads of institutions. The The other things there I've had less to do with, but they're worth a mention. One is the CUC code, the Committee of University Chairs, and the other is the HEFCE business plan, which I'll touch on. Not on this list, but I will come to it at the end, is Lord Wolf's inquiry into the London School of Economics links with Libya. So just a quick flash through all of these things. What did Cadbury say? Well, that's what he said. He made it very clear for the first time that boards of directors were responsible for the governance of the companies. Remarkable that we had to say that in 1992. That the responsibilities of the board included setting the strategy or the strategic aims for the company, providing leadership to put them into effect, and supervising the executive, the management of the company. And then, of course, referring outwards to shareholders. Nolan, who I think is the star in this story, just kept it simple. He defined in that period in the mid-90s 7 principles in public life: objectivity, forcing people, if you like, or insisting that people make choices on appointments and contracts, and the reward of staff on the basis of merit, not any bias. Accountability, ensuring that you submit to scrutiny that is appropriate to the office you hold. I hold the world record for attendances at the Public Accounts Committee, and there's nothing worse than having your feet held to the fire in that setting. Openness, being as open as possible, giving reasons for your decisions, having a publications policy that is open and transparent, integrity, not placing yourself under any financial obligation that might result in someone seeking to influence you in the performance of your duty, selflessness, acting solely in the public interest, if you like, honesty, declaring interest, taking steps to resolve conflicts, and leadership, promoting these principles by example, not by saying it, not by writing it down, not by telling other people they've got to do it, but kind of living that way. And I think these principles, are worth a read every so often. And I think a lot of the claptrap that's been written about governance since, in endless long reports, none of which I've mentioned, bad enough to mention 9, but I guess there are at least 50 since the early 90s that we could have referenced tonight. All of them boil down, I think, to something around these principles. Public sector is a wee bit different. This was our kind of model of how to think about the public sector, focusing on the organisation's purpose and outcomes for citizens and service users. Sometimes I think people in the public sector get so caught up in the processes they're running, they kind of forget why they're there. Having clearly articulated values, taking informed and transparent decisions, managing risks where risks arise, and also being committed to the sustainability of the governing body, kind of developing capacity and capability of the governing body to be effective not just now but into the future, dealing with difficult issues of succession and all of that, and making accountability real by reporting to not your shareholders in this model but to your stakeholders. I said a lot about Nolan, but just let me show you how I think his ideas can be applied. I've just picked 2 of the 7 references. So when I was doing this thing about parliamentary expenses in Scotland, we spent a whole day, or at least the others spent a whole day, worrying about a set of principles that would govern what we do, and I kind of eventually in frustration said, well, we got the principles, Nolan produced them 15 years ago, why don't we use these? And they said, no, we can't possibly use these, we've got to reinvent the whole thing, we've got to invent our own. But of course they work perfectly well. if you take these two of openness and selflessness. I'll not read that out, but you can see where I'm coming from. These are transferable ideas that I think it's useful to have. I'm not going to go on about data. It's a personal interest of mine, and it's probably not an interest of anyone here, but it's an issue of growing concern, and it's an issue that needs very high standards of governance. And because of the way in which data flows around the world, international standards of governance very difficult to get at. It needs professional practice. Those of you who have been on the wrong side of the Information Commissioner know this. And it needs public engagement. You know, it's in the category. Big data, big brother, is in the category of GM foods, animal experimentation, all of these things. It's something that worries the public, and there's no point in telling them about it or trying to imply that somehow we know better. They've got to be engaged in discussion about how this stuff's going to be handled. Okay, from now on I'm going to talk only about higher education. Without any legislation to support the higher education system following the reforms, you know, Hefke cleverly, you know, what you need in situations like that, where everything's confused, is a diagram. And people spent weeks, you know, producing this diagram. And the simple ideas in it are, you need a gateway. You need to have some sort of threshold which new entrants to higher education, this is the kind of notion of private universities coming into play, new entrants to higher education have to pass some tests about degree awarding powers, about university title, which in itself has a huge value, you know, the idea of being a university. Who should receive Hefke grant, designation for student support purposes, by which I mean grants and loans. So there needs to be a gateway that's not there at the moment. You know, these people are kind of entering at will and causing quite a lot of chaos. And Hefke's now got the job to sort it out, but doesn't have the legislative cover to do so. So that'll need to be fixed after the election. But what are the building blocks? What does this all boil down to? What is it we're trying to get hold of here? And I think the ideas are simple. They're in the middle box, which is the important bit here. Students, taxpayers, the wider public need to be sure that their money is being spent, if not wisely, at least properly, and spent well. They need to be confident that academic quality and standards are securely maintained. Why would you want to be at a university where that wasn't the case? You need to know that information about courses and qualifications is accurate. You need to know that access to university is a fair process. One of the questions that was raised in the Wolf report about LSE. You need to ensure that there's a complaint system for students in place. And I think most students want to know, they don't have to know, but they like to know that institutions are well governed and financially viable. And I say that because you know, that is not always the case. And there was, I don't think it'll happen, but there was a kind of doomsday scenario through 2012 where we actually thought that it's conceivable that a number of universities would go bust and the existing student body would just be left high and dry. And how could that all be properly managed in their interests in a way that didn't damage their lives or their life chances? Back to good old Hefke, recognising that there isn't just one model for a university in this country. It's a very diverse range of institutions that we're dealing with, but every institution is headed by a governing body. Some Vice Chancellors don't like this phrase that I wrote, but the governing body is unambiguously and collectively responsible for overseeing the university's activities. That's where the buck stops. It doesn't stop with me or with Susan, it stops with the governing body. Of course we've got a part to play on that, but it stops there. And therefore that body has to have a say in determining the future direction of the institution and in creating an environment in which its objectives are achieved and the potential, but also the aspirations, I would argue, of students are properly realised. Other thing that's current is that the CUC, the Committee of University Chairs, have just produced another code of governance, as if we need another one. They repeat the unambiguously and collectively point because they like that, because they're the chairs of boards and they think they're the bosses. But they also include reference, and this is something that doesn't appear in many codes, references to institutional reputation and the need to protect institutional reputation, and that's there's a direct line between the Wolf report on LSE and that recommendation, or that principle, if you like. Institutional sustainability. Governing bodies haven't quite crossed the line yet, although some of them would like to get involved in issues of academic governance, but they need to be sure that the senior staff of universities and the academic community in universities have effective academic governance in place. Promoting equality and diversity, obviously important, and also a kind of sense not just about reviewing governance practices, but benchmarking them against best practice over time. So interesting things there. HEFCE's new strategy, just published last week, it talks about these things, but just think beyond these things. What are the messages, what are the governance messages that are coming out of this? Well, firstly, they're telling us about research integrity and the importance of that. They're reinforcing the message about the effectiveness of academic governance. They're signalling that they're watching around questions of fairness. They want to be conscious of issues at the boundary with private companies. They recognise, rightly in my view, that there has to be more emphasis on students and the interests of students alongside the traditional preoccupation with financial sustainability. And of course they're bidding for immortality by becoming the big key regulator after the election and being the people who kind of shape the legislation for the future. We'll see if that happens. Now, meanwhile, having been subject to all of this stuff, we've had it all sorted out for 100 years anyway. You know, this is the kind of frontispiece to the University of Leeds Charter, quite simple, a few pages. It talks about establishing the university, breaking up the Victoria University, that was the kind of the merged organisation of what is now the University of Leeds, the University of Manchester and the University of Liverpool, giving us separate status. It confirms our powers, which is largely around setting degrees and giving degrees and doing research. It sets out the governance structure of the university, court, the council, and senate. It defines the roles and responsibilities of the principal officers, the VC, the PVCs, the Pro-Chancellor, the Chancellor, and so on. And it also, by kind of virtue of being able to negotiate with the Privy Council, is able to move with the times. You can get it changed. So we have very strong statements in ours now, for example, about equality and diversity. And the question then is, well, why do you need all this other stuff? I'm going to finish just in 5 minutes, but let me just say two more things. I thought I'd better, because it was in the title, say a little bit more about social responsibility. This is what we kind of worked on in HEFCE, but this is not what we're recommending about social responsibility in higher education. This was HEFCE as a little organisation of 200 or 300 people thinking about its own areas of social responsibility. What I think is much more important is how we interpret that responsibility at an institutional level. And I think there are some keys here that stand universities in good stead and indeed head off the potential for governance problems. The idea of having, and I'm sure you have one here, an agreed and published set of values. These are ours: integrity, inclusiveness, community, and professionalism, all focused on the kind of principal mission of academic excellence is important. Whistleblowing, I think, is increasingly important, and I'm really thinking about internal responsibility here. Come to external in a minute. Whistleblowing, hugely important, and I think that title puts a lot of people off, worries a lot of people. But if you think of it in terms of handling complaints of suspected malpractice or impropriety, or if you like, providing a kind of window or a conduit to these sorts of complaints, why wouldn't you want it to be part of a healthy organisation? We feel that we've got a responsibility to the whole community. We work very hard on providing support for students with disability. In Leeds, again, I'm sure you do here too. We have extensive outreach programs, so we're taking the idea of a university education. We think last year to 120,000 learners, potential students of the future from primary school upwards. We worry about information. We run programs of public service and citizenship. So today, 3.5, probably nearly 4,000 students from the University of Leeds will be volunteering somewhere in Leeds, and these are the people we know about. These are the people who kind of use our services in the university. There'll be many others who do it in their own right. We try to follow an integrated approach to sustainability, thinking about environmental, social and economic issues. And of course we haven't talked about charities very much tonight, but we do have this requirement as an exempt charity to be able to show public benefit from our activities, and that's part of our charitable purpose. So I feel that I've come a long way through this conversation without using one important word, and that is the word trust. I just wanted to kind of finish by talking about that for a second or two. Some of you might remember in 2002, Honora O'Neill, who then probably was still on the staff, probably still is on the staff at Cambridge, did the Wreath lectures. I often claim, by the way, that Honora O'Neill, who I think is a great kind of voice in these sort of issues in this country, would not be here if it wasn't for me, because I genuinely think I saved her life one night as she was about to be ploughed down by a London bus. We had been at the 75th anniversary celebration of the Wellcome Trust on Euston Road, she and I, and as we left, everyone was given little presents that were in a wooden box. And she got so preoccupied crossing the busy road towards Euston Station by this blooming box that she didn't see the bus coming. And I literally had to lift her by her shoulders and run her across the road. So the very fact that she's here is down to me. So each, she argued in these lectures, I've only got 2 quotes, that each of us in every profession and every institution needs trust. We need it because we have to be able to rely on others acting as they say they will, do what they say they will do, and because we need others to accept that we will act as we say we will. 5 lectures later in the BBC Wreath series, and this is partly what I've been saying tonight about all this kind of governance speak, is that elaborate measures to ensure that people keep agreements and do not betray trust must, in the end, not be backed by codes of practice and endless reports and inquiries, but must be backed by trust. So she comes kind of full circle and says at some point we just have to trust. There is, I think, no complete answer to the old question of who will guard the guardians. So I'm going to leave that question a little bit in the air and just finish giving my cue to my respondent by mentioning the Wolf report. So just on this question of trust, Lord Wolf did the work on LSE, quoting a witness to his inquiry, put in a nutshell what became, I think, a central finding of his inquiry report. And that was simply this. He said that part of the problem we have got today is that we are like a growing business, but the governance procedures are not adequate to cover the growth. And this, of course, is against the background of huge scale kind of international developments at LSE and indeed in many other universities. When you are small, he said, you do a lot of things on trust, but as you grow, you have to have systems in place. I think you've got to have more than trust. So whilst Honora O'Neill thinks there's no option, that trust has got to be enough, he clearly argued that trust is not enough. And I think that's a bit of a conundrum we all deal with day by day. His central conclusion from his report was that the relationships between LSE and Libya were subject to what is very common in university, which is mission drift. They started as one thing and then they grew and developed in an incremental fashion, kind of uncontrolled. He argued that in that sort of situation due diligence is important, he did say plainly that the whole sequence of events there, which we haven't got time to go into, exposed a disconcerting number of failures in communications and governance within the school. But his recommendations were actually very simple. This is the potted version. He wanted LSE to have an embedded code dealing with questions of ethics and reputational risks. He wanted greater uniformity of practice for the admission of PhD students. This was the question marks that surrounded the admission to LSE of Saif Gaddafi as a PhD student. That was then linked to the possibility of donations to the university, and he argued for a proper policy on donations. And I think this is increasingly a big issue for a university. We have something in Leeds called the Gift Acceptance Committee, and we really kind of rigorously look at these things. And I don't think we would have done that had it not been for the Wolf recommendations. And then the other thing is that lots of universities have little kind of offshoots. We all have associated companies and little kind of charities on the side. There was an important element of that in the Wolf report with something called LSE Enterprise, which obvious what that would have done. But he argues that you can't just let these little groupings loose. You've got to kind of tie these into your code of ethics and governance. Conclusions don't really have any. Trust is not enough, but we have to keep the message simple. All this dissonance about what's going on and these endless reports about governance, I don't think are necessarily the answer. If we're keeping it simple, what do we want? For most institutions, very clearly articulated values as a point of reference and values that people live and breathe. We want to take note of Nolan's work on the 7 principles in public life. We want a clear understanding of accountability, our collective and our individual lines of accountability. not only to our kind of governing bodies and beyond to the government sometimes, but also to our stakeholders. I mean, I'm much more interested in my accountability to the students than I am in any accountability I have to HEFCE. And of course, an ethos of doing the right thing and doing the thing right. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you.